I realized I really enjoyed the science, and I found that I really enjoyed helping people. And it just was a perfect blend of the two ideas. And the only doctors I was familiar with as a child growing up were these. And so in my mind, that's what a doctor was. And so I just never really lost vision of that. And I continued pursuing that all throughout my medical training.
So fairly different from the way medicine is practiced here in the UK. We're quite a small country.
But a large portion of the United States is rural. It doesn't happen every time. Sometimes there are no answers. But when you're able to help get that person to a place where they can heal, it's a really wonderful experience to be able to be part of that.
So I'm your host, Dr. Shubhendra Kulshresht, emergency medicine doctor and your founder coach, also the man behind clinician-founder.com. This is the show where we explore how clinicians go from idea to impact. Each week, I sit down with clinicians who are building businesses, products, communities, services, and movements that matter. Together, we unpack what they found, what they tested, what they built really takes to bring meaningful ideas to life. But this week, I have a very special episode for you. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Peter Crane, MD, a board-certified family physician who has provided a full spectrum of care in rural Idaho since 2011. He's the founder and host of Doctors Making a Difference, where he explores stories of physicians creating impact beyond traditional career paths. Peter's perspective has also been profoundly shaped by his experience on both sides of medicine as a doctor and as a patient. Peter, welcome to the Clinician Founder podcast.
Oh, thank you. I'm delighted to be here. I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, it's so good to have you. And I think I'm really excited about today's conversation because obviously Doctors Making a Difference was a meaningful idea that you brought to life, but you have so many more conversations with doctors making an impact as well. I guess to start with, I should probably ask you, what does the term clinician founder mean to you?
Well, I guess the idea that I think of when I see that is we're not supposed to just be employees that go punch the clock and be sort of robotic about our job. We as physicians, you have this really broad, useful education, and usually medicine selects people who are really interested in improving humanity. And so if you're going to do something that's more than just working for somebody else, you do have to be a bit of a founder. You have to say, so I'm going to start something, and whether it be a business or a movement or research project or whatever it is that you choose to do with your creativity, you're founding or creating something that nobody else has done before. And one of the themes of the podcast that I host is to try to leave medicine better than we found it. And I think as a physician founder, that phrase, I believe that's one of the ways we can do that. Instead of just taking care of the person in front of us, you can try to extend that care beyond the clinic or beyond the emergency, and you try to leave a legacy so that it is helpful to somebody else who comes along the way. And I hope that satisfies your answer, but I do believe that that's what a founder does.
I think that's such a useful perspective, especially in today's time when we see the struggle that healthcare as a whole is going through globally. And I speak to my colleagues in India, in the US, in the UK. I think there's some common challenges there where we're just not meeting the care that we as clinicians hope to provide, but also as patients hope to receive. And I think there is a change that is needed and is coming about. And it's through the people, it's through clinicians seeing that things can be done differently. Would you mind sharing a little bit about your journey behind you becoming a doctor and then starting Doctors Making a Difference?
Sure. Like many people, I was not born from a family of physicians. I really didn't know any doctor beyond the doctor that we went to as a child, but I had this idea that I liked science. And I think most people who became physicians found this interest in caring for people and enjoying science. But I remember one time I was talking to my dad. We operated a small family farm. And one of the doctors in our small local community also had a farm. And he just said, "Hey, Peter, maybe you should become a doctor. And then you could come back and you could be like this gentleman, Dr. Daines. You could own a farm and you could help people." And so when I was a young man, this sounded great. And so I guess that's probably the first time that ever got rooted in my mind. But I liked the idea. As I went on through schooling, I realized I really enjoyed the science. And I found that I really enjoyed helping people. And it just was a perfect blend of the two ideas. And the only doctors I was familiar with as a child growing up were these broad spectrum rural family doctors that delivered the babies, worked in the emergency room, took care of people in the hospital, and did really all aspects of primary care. And so in my mind, that's what a doctor was. And so I just never really lost vision of that. And I continued pursuing that all throughout my medical training.
So a little bit of everything. I think fairly different from the way medicine is practiced here in the UK, where most of us end up being specialists unless you choose to be a GP, in which case you're still working very closely with hospitals, and nothing's too far here in the UK. We're quite a small country. So,
well, even in the United States, I would say that most of my colleagues subspecialized in some area, which is wonderful. We need every aspect of medicine. But a large portion of the United States is rural, and it's a very large landmass. And sometimes an urban area can be 3 or 4 hours or more drive time to get there. And so you have to have people who can exist in these kind of frontier wilderness environments. And maybe it was crazy, but I was very drawn to that because it's what I knew and I was excited. And so I was given an opportunity to come back to the same community where I grew up. And I've been practicing I actually took the place of the physician who delivered me when he retired and I came in. And I've had the honor of working in that same community for 15 years now. I've really enjoyed it.
Wow, what a story. I think I completely resonate with you in the sense of the idea of what it means to be a doctor is a little bit of everything. And I could get to experience that in the emergency department to a certain degree as well. And so I hear you being the center of the community, being in the space where, you grew up there, everybody around you. What was the sort of impact that you were hoping to make in your role as a doctor?
I don't think I understood quite what it would entail prior to starting that journey. I knew that what the doctors help people, but I think all of us, when you get down to the nitty gritty, you're into the details of caring for people. Sometimes it can feel like you're really just doing the paperwork or you're doing some aspect of it that isn't that meaningful. But then I realize if not me, then who? Like that sentiment. A lot of times when somebody shows up and they really are experiencing a disaster or a crisis or a trauma or something where they have no idea what's going on with their child, and you get to direct them and find the diagnosis and lead them to a solution, that's a real satisfying feeling. It doesn't happen every time. Sometimes there are no answers. But when you're able to help get that person to a place where they can heal, it's a really wonderful experience to be able to be part of that. And that always restores me and makes me feel hopeful about my job.
Yeah, I think those moments are what we kind of keep going for and keep pushing for. What does your typical week look like?
It depends. So the first 10 years of my career post-residency, we did a lot of the emergency room coverage, as well as clinic and hospital and obstetrics and C-sections and just a little bit of everything. And it was really busy. In the last 5 years, we hired some outside help to help a little bit in the emergency room. We expanded our numbers just a little bit. So it's not just the 3 or 4 of us against the world. We've been able to increase that a little bit. So I would say a typical work week, I have clinics scheduled during during the weekdays, typically from 8 to 5 or 8 to 6, somewhere along those lines. And now about 2 days out of a month, I will also do a 24-hour shift in the emergency room. And sometimes that can be, in the winter, it might be a relatively low volume experience. And in the summer, we have lots of visitors and it can be continuous and full of traumas and difficulties. And then obstetrics, you never know when people are going to be born. Babies come when they come. They love 2:00 in the morning for some reason. And then I look forward to time with family when I have these wonderful colleagues that I work with. So I will often, on a day when I'm not in clinic, sign out to one of my colleagues and say, hey, I need to be gone or do something with one of my kids or go on a hike or do some outdoor thing. And that's what makes it possible, is because I have really, truly excellent colleagues and we sign out to each other, and it really helps a lot.
Yeah, having good colleagues goes so far.
Yeah.
Could you share a little bit about your experience as a founder of Doctors Making a Difference?
Yeah, like we talked just for a moment before hitting record, I've shared on my podcast, Doctors Making a Difference. I went through something I did not envision. At age 43, I found a large 26 centimeter retroperitoneal tumor called a solitary fibrous tumor, type of sarcoma. And I know I had studied about that type of tumor in medical school somewhere way back, but I'm sure it got lost on the list of all the different sarcomas. But solitary fibrous tumor is a slow growing tumor, but it had gotten to be very large. And so I found that, and unfortunately, and went through the whole diagnostic process and chemotherapy and radiation and extensive surgery. And I remember laying in the hospital at the cancer hospital, just recovering from this big surgery. And I didn't know what the future would entail because, number one, I wasn't sure at that point how aggressive this tumor would be, if it would reoccur. And then number two, the surgery was very extensive and I had quite a bit of damage to the nerves on my leg. And I couldn't really walk without the use of a walker at that point. And I was not sure what the future held. I don't think he could know because it was just so new and fresh. And I'm a physician. I know the ups and downs and that not everything gets a perfect outcome. But I remember sitting there thinking, well, I don't know if I'll get to work as a doctor or not. I don't know if I'll be able to live. It's just so many uncertain things. But I remember laying there thinking about medicine, and I was so appreciative of the doctors who had taken their time to help me and this whole treatment team, the accumulation of thousands of hours of training so that they could be ready when it was my moment in need. And I was so profoundly thankful for the team that did that. I just had this idea that if I could do it again, I would be a doctor. It might sound cliche or cheesy, but that's what I came to. Like, I just am so honored to be a doctor. I'm happy to be a part of this group. And so it was at that point that I thought, I need to, instead of just talking about it, I need to amplify physician voices, and I need to give them resources and tools so that all of us can find the beautiful, meaningful parts of this job, instead of just doing the clinical work or the parts that sometimes seem a little bit onerous. And so that's where I started Doctors Making a Difference, which is, the idea was to highlight physicians and then really to hook people up or connect them with resources that they may need, whether it be financial or planning or counseling or whatever it may be, so that people can continue to do this meaningful work. And I've really enjoyed the connections I've made with hundreds of doctors through that experience.
Wow. So it sounds like it really became a platform to find these unique individuals making a big difference and then helping them sustain and amplify their impact in a way as well.
That's right.
How come you turned to podcasting as the platform of choice? How did that end up being your go-to?
Well, for one thing, podcasting is, as you know, it's something you can fit in. Like, it doesn't require 20 hours a week, depending. I guess you could spend as much time on it as you want. But in a busy clinic job, I don't have that kind of time. But in podcasting, you can spend an hour recording a session with an individual, and then maybe another hour editing or promoting or something along those lines. But I would say per episode, per week, I would say I put in no more than about 2 hours. And so number one was the timing. And then number two is it had a broad reach. It wasn't just isolated to people that were in my community or someone that I could drive to. It was really limitless. You could talk to folks anywhere around the world. You and I can have a discussion. I'm in Idaho getting ready to work this morning, and you're in England, multiple time zones away across an ocean, and we can have a normal conversation. So podcasting has this really powerful opportunity to amplify voices and connect people all over the globe. So I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, that's fun. Could you share some success stories of what's come off this podcast and how long it's taken you to get there?
I suppose it's like anything. The person who gains the most from it is the person who's preparing the talk or who's doing it. So I feel like I've gained the most talking to people all over the place and hearing some inspiring stories. And I just, every story I would say that we talk about on the podcast, I've found to be very interesting in hearing how people do it. But there's a couple of them that stand out. One is a gentleman who was on his way back from doing a service trip in Uganda. He was helping some people, and he had been doing some kind of a cardiology work, and he happened to have a pocket EKG, a pocket ECG in his carry-on bag. And somebody on the plane had, I don't remember if it was a heart attack, but they had some sort of major health issue. And he was able to do not only, walk up from the airplane and check the person and check their vitals and see how they were doing. He had his little pocket EKG. He was able to determine if they were having a STEMI or not. And he was able to direct the flight to land a little bit early, and they were, was able to help. And another one is a gentleman who had been very successful in his financial career. He had worked on Wall Street and had been featured in multiple financial magazines. And he was in his 30s, And he realized, even though he was very successful on paper, it was not enough for him. He needed to he's like, when I tell my grandchildren about what I did for my career, it can't be that I made really good trades on the stock market. I have to say that I helped people in a way that was just profound. So he went back to medical school at the age where most of the people his age had already been attending physicians, and he was brand new, starting in his first year of medical school. But he did it, and he started this wonderful psychological education foundation, and he kind of has made a big difference in Western United States and provided telemedicine for psychiatry across thousands of people, and making this huge impact. And so people like that, I just find all these stories to be super inspiring. And then I think, well, I want to do a little bit more with my education and my career, and I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, those are so inspiring, and to be able to give people like that a platform is so valuable. I think it goes on to inspire hundreds more. And I've probably been listening to podcasts, I want to say over 15 years now, probably. And hugely transformative in my thought process in terms of what we're doing with our careers. Circling back to the mention of, we're not just physicians to deliver clinical care, we're here to make healthcare better and leave it better than we've found it. With regards to podcasts, I just want to dive into that a little bit more. So clearly you had this vision and this intention to make a difference, to doctors making a difference. Were there any challenges in actually making it work?
Sure. I mean, it's getting started, as you know, having done this, is hard. The very first time you open up your mouth and begin to record something, you feel imposter syndrome. How could anybody listen to this? What I'm making is garbage. Nobody would listen. So there's a little bit of a working process to get started. But I also think that, just trying to learn the details of how do I go about publishing this, and that took quite a bit of time. I've created something, and now I got to figure out how to edit it, and then I've got to put it forth. And so I've been really blessed to work with a team of physician podcasters called the Doctor Podcast Network, and that's been great. And they've helped cross promotion among physicians. And that helps us find sponsors, which helps pay for the cost of doing the podcasting, and it helps with editing. And so there's a tremendous number of resources out there for podcasters, but until you're generating some sort of cash flow, it's hard to pay for the editing services. And so some of those things I found to be really challenging at first. Now we're in a little bit more of a holding pattern, and the podcast needs to grow just a little bit, because it's the objective is not to make money necessarily, but I always tell my wife it needs to pay for itself. She's happy to let me do my passion project, but it needs to at least be cash neutral so that it's paying for itself, because it fulfills me as a person. But it doesn't. Trying to find those sources of income and then being able to make sure that this is something that can be survivable, that can keep going on, even if. Even if I can't find all the time to do it, I found that to be a little bit challenging.
Yeah, I think that resonates with me as well in terms of the podcast, but also so many of the guests I speak to, the people I work with, there's always this initial hump of you're just pushing, and it's taking your time, it's taking your money, and you've got to get to that point of break even. Is that what you've experienced with your guests as well in terms of how they come about making a difference? What's the biggest challenge for them?
I don't know. Like, one of the things that I've really enjoyed about podcasting, and just like you alluded to, when you listen to a podcast and it's not necessarily a scripted advertisement type of thing, it's just an individual who's doing the work and telling you their lived experience in kind of a long format, like podcasting. I find it really inspiring. So when I talk to guests, usually I'm talking to someone who's doing the work, and they're busy in their lives doing so many things. And I find it very inspiring, because you're not just listening to this perfect like retrospective evaluation of what's happening. You're talking to the person who's doing exactly what you're very interested in doing, and it's really meaningful and interesting. And for my guests, I suppose they have the same challenges I do. They're working busy jobs, they have families, they've got lots of things going on. So for them to try to find time to put themselves out there, I guess, and say what it is challenging. And then they experience the same thing that I think I did. Maybe that imposter syndrome, say, well, I'm just me. I'm just doing this. But when you talk to somebody, do you realize that what you're doing is unique and incredible? And when somebody else hears about it, just you sounds actually really impressive. And so that's been fun to amplify their voices and let people know when they share that story. It is inspiring to other doctors and any listener who would be interested in that.
Yeah. Have there been any other sort of patterns or surprising, interesting trends you've picked up in the sort of people you interview?
I guess what I've found is sometimes when I initiate an interview, or a guest reaches out to me, or I contact somebody and we start it. Usually, there's some reason I'm interested in the specialty that they have, or where they practice, or something along those lines. And I don't know if it's surprising, but individuals will often underrate, or they won't really think that what they're doing is that impressive. But when you talk to people and hear some of the stories, like whether it be a patient interaction or some way that they set up a foundation, or they help somebody in some way, instead of just being a small thing that impacts a small number of people, a lot of times they find out that it's really helped a lot of individuals. And then when they're willing to share it on a podcast, that impact ripples out and it spreads. And so that's been actually really fun to kind of talk to people, and a bit surprising as people realize how big of an impact that has. And I'll tell you one story. There's a gentleman I interviewed a few months ago who was nearing retirement age, and he decided that he was going to donate an entire year's salary to curing blindness in Ghana. He's never even been to Ghana, but he had this idea that instead of just retiring and, spending the money that he had saved throughout his career, he wanted to do something really impactful with that back end of his career, to say, what if I worked another year, but instead of saving it to pay off some personal thing that he needed to pay, what if I sent that to do something that would do lasting good forever? And amazing. He's like, now I go to work and I love it. Like I know that I'm not just doing another shift. Every dollar I earn is going to help cure somebody's cataract in Ghana. And then further than that, he got this foundation that he was working with, decided to start an entire I think it was a residency program in Ghana so that they could train eye surgeons, and his impact will last potentially for generations. He told me he enjoyed it so much that he might do another year because of the tremendous impact. And so those kind of stories are both delightful to hear, but and they're also really inspiring. You realize, wow, it's not just me and my family. You have this opportunity to really leave the world better than you found it, and bless the world with the things that you're given stewardship over. And those are really fun when you talk to somebody. They don't think they're making that big of an impact, or what they're doing is that big a deal. And yet when you talk about it, you realize, do you realize how cool that is? Like, that's a really inspiring thing.
That is so inspiring, and also such a good example of how your day-to-day can change just with having clarity of purpose behind what you're trying to achieve. And I think we all sort of become physicians, and we've got a day job, and we know that what we're doing is important and meaningful and impactful. But I think somewhere along the way, it gets a bit diluted or hidden, or maybe just normalized to such an extent. If any of us goes to shift, we look at like how many pounds an hour, dollars an hour we're getting paid, and we don't really know that actually is literally equal to whatever lives we're saving or the change we're creating in the world. And having that clarity is such an interesting thing. And I wonder if we could do more of that as physicians in general.
I think so. It's almost like you need an outside perspective once in a while to realize how impactful it is. It's certainly more than just punching the clock and doing the job. Because, for example, you work in the emergency room, and I do too. And it's interesting because a lot of times I don't have any previous knowledge of the person who comes in. They're presenting with an acute problem, or what they perceive as an acute problem, and we're going through a workup. And sometimes those seem routine, like, oh yeah, you needed something, we couldn't get you into the outpatient clinic, but we got you into the emergency room and you were able to take care of it. And other times the person has so they haven't been to the doctor for years, and they have something that's very important to discover, and you discover it. And it's more than just saying like, well, I went to work and did my job. You saved their life, and whether right then as a true emergency, or you found something that would have gone on to shorten their life, and it's more impactful than just that person. It has impacts their spouse and their children and their family, and so I think it's important once in a while to step back and realize how big an impact you really have as a physician and what a cool job it really is. I think being a physician is it's still really, I believe, the most important and coolest job there is in the world. It's hard. It's not an easy job, but it is so impactful and so personal. There's nothing quite like it.
Absolutely. I was on a podcast yesterday and I was asked, did I ever think about leaving or why didn't I leave? I think was how the question was framed. And I just couldn't imagine it. I mean, there was a point where I almost left, but I had to turn around and say, this is such a fantastic job that how can I leave it? There's got to be a way of doing this and more rather than having to choose between this or something else. So that's amazing. The word impact always comes up on my podcast. Pretty much every episode we're talking about impact. The other thing that tends to come up is trust. Does that come up for you on your podcast as well?
Yes, I would say that physicians are generally in a position of great trust. We live in a strange time where people want to cast dispersion or doubt on every institution there is, including physicians and hospitals and research institutions. But when it's you and your doctor, people trust you. And it's interesting. People say, I don't trust doctors. I don't trust this or that, but I'll trust my doctor. I'll trust my doctor if that physician says that's what's going on, I'm going to listen to what they say. And that's not universally true, of course, but I have found that it is a position of great trust. And with that trust, comes a responsibility to us as doctors to hold that trust sacred and to make sure that we do perform at a professional level. And it's also nice to compare notes with other physicians who are doing this work and realize it's not just a glorified technician. You're supposed to be able to integrate all these details and look at the person in front of you and say, instead of just saying, well, this is what the AI overview says you have, you're supposed to be able to say, I know what this is based on these physical exam findings, your history, your labs, your tests, imaging. And it's really quite helpful. And it's more than data assimilation. It really has to be being in the role of a healer. And doctors really have this profound opportunity to be healers. The world seems like they want healers in every direction. They're always looking for healing that maybe doesn't come from the best sources. But physicians that are science-based and very interested in good, compassionate humans really have the ability to be in that role, and we need to honor that. We need to preserve it in a way so that it's good for our patients and good for future generations of physician healers.
Yeah, I think that's such a beautiful perspective. We're here to heal, and I think if I'm translating that across to your world as a founder, I think there's so much transferable, not just skills that you can take across from being a physician, but I think the intention of who you are as well. I think if the way in which you're healing as a clinician can often be the way in which you heal as a founder. I don't know if that resonates with you in any way or with the people you've spoken to.
I think so. Like I said, with my podcast, one of the things that we look at is to try to leave medicine better than we found it, and to try to amplify or magnify the impact, or another word is to scale your impact. I can see my patients in front of me. I can see, maybe at a maximum day, 20 or 30 people in a day. It's very busy. But what if you could scale that impact across hundreds of people, whether, and that's through being a founder. You're talking to hundreds of clinicians and hundreds of patients and people who listen to your podcast, and that amplifies or scales that impact to a larger degree. So I do think being a founder does help in that regard, because you can take an idea and instead of just talking to the person in front of you, you put it on a podcast just like you do. And now suddenly, instead of just having a conversation with one person, you have a conversation with many people. And that really can have a profound impact across a large group.
I think, impact, trust. In your story, there's clearly been a reason for you starting this venture as a founder yourself, and then having a conversation with other doctors, making a difference, scaling your impact. I guess if we zoom out a little bit, what are some of the big picture trends or gaps that you're noticing in where people do need to make a difference, or how they're being successful behind it?
Again, it's a big question, but what I've observed is, number one, I don't think people realize the power they have as physicians. Like that's one thing I've observed is people go to medical school, they go to residency, they go to fellowship, or a whole bunch of training, And when we're in those roles, very often we see ourselves as just part of a progression. In other words, sometimes people don't realize the impact they have to be business owners or founders. They feel like they're just in debt and I've got to get through this and I've got to pay it back. And you don't really think outside of that. Yet, if you really look at the deep education that you really have the opportunity to scale that impact tremendously. If you look across, if you look at patients' interactions and say, I can take this beyond just doing one thing for one person, but I can now take this and educate people and do things across so that many people are getting the impact of what I'm doing. I don't know if that is missing in education. I don't feel like people have really good education about starting businesses or financial stewardship. There's a lot of things that medical education focuses on, but there's some of the business aspects of it that are really not taught well in the U.S. medical system. And so I think people maybe they kind of fall short of their opportunities because they don't really have that training. And me included, I went through that, and I know at the beginning of my first job, I saw myself as an employee and really nothing more. But as time has gone on, I realized, I'm the only one with the medical training. So my employer, who's really nice, and I really enjoy working for them, but they're not there at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning dealing with the crisis. They don't have the training. And so it really needs to be the physician that maintains that power so that they can continue to offer this profound impact to our patients.
Do you think then it's almost a responsibility for every clinician or physician to kind of understand how to scale their impact and affect more people?
Well, I think so. I do wish that we had a little bit more formal financial education and some of these business tools that would help a person to realize, instead of just going and doing this job as a physician, you need to learn, well, how do you get paid as a doctor? And how should you take care of your finances? And how, if you wanted to start a business so that you could do things in the way that you found to be most meaningful, how could you do it? And so I do, because it's not really baked into medical training per se, I do think it falls upon us to educate ourselves and say, what are the things that I could do so that I'm not just beholden to my employer. And I guess one of the reasons I think about it now is many people get to a certain point in their career and they say, is this it? Do I just have to go work these tremendous number of hours week after week, and there's really no end in sight? And maybe people start to feel burned out and frustrated. And yet, when I talk to people on my podcast, many of them have started businesses, or they've founded, your word, they've started side hustles, or they've done things with their medical education that are really impactful. And when I talk to people, those are the things they find really meaningful. And so I wish that I had known even earlier on in my career about the impact, and whether you start your own business or you start your own side business, understanding the process of how you can make an income and how you can do things and leave a lasting legacy. That's a really important set of education that sometimes I feel like we're almost like children going through this process. When you finally finish medical education, all your peers have gone through this learning process, and you've been in the hospital so many hours, you've learned a lot about medicine, but maybe you haven't learned some of these other aspects of a career path that other people might have learned.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, after getting my coach certification and training and all of these skills, I was doing a bit of market research to say, actually, where can I help people? Where do I fit in being able to serve them? And there was a lot of people who I had a conversation with who were disillusioned with medicine, a bit burnt out and wanting to sort of just leave and do anything else. But there was another cohort of people, I'd say almost 50% or 40% of people I spoke to, who had this feeling of, I've got to do something with my life. At the end of it, when I've left, there's got to be something meaningful I leave behind. And I think there's so many of us self-selecting as clinicians, as doctors in that group, that I think we don't get taught the tools and the ways to bring that to life, to bring our ideas to life, to make an impact. And we just kind of go hopping from one idea to another idea to maybe do another role, and like, oh, we've gotten to the top of the ladder, but I'm not really fulfilled. And I think it's fairly universal, wouldn't you say?
I think so. And I think sometimes you almost need permission if you say it, because people get to a certain place where, just like you said, you've reached the top of your role. You finished the schooling and the certification, and now you've been doing it for a few years. And certainly you have things that surprise you and things you learn. But I think people get trapped and they think, well, I have to do this for the next 30 years. I can't change anything. I just have to go through this. And if it's almost like you need to give people permission to change, and permission granted. If you need to modify your career, then do it. If you need to change to a different job, if you need to start a business, if you need to take some time off and kind of recalculate, make sure you've done your financial homework so that you can make those changes, and permission granted. Do those things. You only get to live life one time. And if there's something you're doing that's not satisfying or not using the impact to the way you want, feel free to change it. And sometimes I feel like we get ourselves trapped. And so it is one of the things we speak about on the podcast is the ability to shift and mobilize and modify what you're doing, and the importance of managing your finances early on, so that not necessarily so that you can be wealthy, but so that you have the ability to change. And when you get to a point in your career where something needs to modify, you're not so afraid of leaving an employment situation because of, oh dear, what am I going to do? How am I going to eat? You say, well, I've saved enough so that I'm okay. And if I need to take a couple months off, or if I needed 6 months to carry me through while I start another business, you can do that type of thing. And I do believe that is really impactful for how we live our lives, because we want to look back on our careers and say, what did I do? And it can't just be like, well, I punched the clock every day for 30 years. It needs to be I made a profound impact on my patients, or I started a business, or I did something that was really meaningful. And I think that helps us in our careers to know that we're able to do that. And I think it's good for both us, and it's good for the legacy we leave behind for our families.
Yeah, I love it. So anyone listening to this, permission granted, just go ahead.
Permission granted, right.
Agency.
That's right.
Yeah, I'm curious, Peter, if it wasn't the podcast, how would you do this differently?
It's a good question. I don't know. Like I say, it depends on where you live and the opportunities you involve. The podcast works for me because I live in a place that's rural. It's a way for me to reach out to others. But that is a good question. I do really enjoy my job. Like, I think it's, for me, it really is what I started out wanting to do, and I still enjoy it. And I've been able to modify it over time so that the schedule's a little bit better. But the other area that I have found that has been impactful to me, and if I couldn't have podcasted, maybe this would have been the thing that filled that need, was just getting involved more deeply in my local medical society. I work I live in the state of Idaho, and so we have an Idaho Academy of Family Physicians. And so, and I think every chapter, every state, and I'm sure every country has similar things where you have an organization of your fellow professionals, and it's given me an opportunity to meet with other doctors who work in my same state with the same regulations and same circumstances. And sometimes we're petitioning for change. Sometimes we're advocating for patients. But I've really enjoyed getting involved in that organization. And I would say to others listening, just find a friend. If you feel like you're isolated and alone and nobody else understands, I promise, if you talk to other doctors that kind of work in the same setting as you do, you'll find a whole lot of similarities, because people, you might be in a different city, a different area, but the work is very similar. And even in a different nation, when you talk to people, the regulations and stuff are different, but the care and keeping of our fellow human beings is very similar. Or another one is, go do some service work. We do international work in Uganda and other places pretty often. And I found that, and it's not just me showing up helping people, it's working with a foundation and other doctors and people that are doing this meaningful work. And I found that is such a good reset when I go and help people, and then we leave this long-lasting impact and leave people, in the foundation in that country continues to do the work while we're gone. Those are wonderful experiences. So I think that's what I would have continued to do. I'm glad podcasting is also added onto it, but I think that those are really meaningful, kind of relatively easily accessible ways that we could all get involved and not feel like you're alone in the world.
Yeah. What I'm taking away is that it's not really a matter of if you should do something. It's more like, when would you do it? I think we've all got the responsibility of making something come to life. And if impact is what we're seeking, I think, just get on and find your thing and bring it to life and make the impact that you want to make. Peter, is there anything else that we haven't talked about that we should talk about on this podcast?
Well, I'll just say, the phrase YOLO, you only live once. I don't think about it in the terms of like, well, just do whatever you want with reckless abandon.
Yeah.
But from a professional standpoint, you only get to do this once. And I think that really, when I went through that tumor 3 years ago, I remember thinking like that to a higher degree than I had ever thought it, is you really only get to do this once. And so if there was something you were going to do, if something I was going to do in my life, I shouldn't wait 20 years from now. I shouldn't wait 30 years from now. I should begin to process now. If there's something else that I need to do professionally or personally or with my family, those things need to be prioritized. So you can't do everything at the same time. But if there's a trip you need to go on, or a business you want to start, or a connection you want to make, or some creative pursuit, really now is the time. And it doesn't mean you need to set everything else on hold, but you may not have the future. And I guess that was, we all know that as physicians, you deal with people that have disease and dying every day. But it was just really made more clear to me that the time to do things is now. And the opportunities, when you see those opportunities present, consider it and look at it. And if there's something that you could do that you feel like would be meaningful and impactful to your life, don't put it off into the forever future. Work toward those goals and do them now. And I think I think it has been fulfilling for me to do that. And I would say that's a good message to all of my colleagues out there. If there's something you need to do, follow the YOLO idea. You only live once. Let's get it done.
Let's get it done. That's such a beautiful message. And I think a great place for us to end this podcast episode as well. If people want to reach out to you, find out more, or listen to the Doctors Making a Difference podcast, where can they go?
They can search for Doctors Making a Difference on any podcast platform. You can go to doctorsmakingadifference.com. And I keep up a pretty good contact with LinkedIn profiles. So if you search for Peter Crane or Peter M. Crane on LinkedIn, you'll find my profile on there. And I appreciate it. Thank you so much for letting me be a guest on your show.
No, thank you so much for being here. I'll put those links down in the description for anyone listening and making it easy for them to find you. It's been a pleasure having you on, Peter, and sharing your stories, sharing your experience, and sharing your journey has been absolutely inspirational. And I look forward to speaking again soon on your podcast.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.